Okay. Well, last week, let's see. Let's make sure we catch ourselves up. Kevin, can you catch us up on what we talked about when we ended class last? No, man, he is shy tonight, I guess. Okay, all right. Well, that's all right, Kevin. I'll give you a break tonight on that. So, who can catch us up? How did we end our class last week? Anybody remember how we concluded last week? Yeah, John, do we have a microphone guy? Although it's not as necessary as if John's loud enough because it's not going through the video anyway, but go ahead, John.
It was over for the Jews and the relationship that God wanted with them as far as we could see when the last person died or he was taken away in captivity. That was the last of the bloodline of David.
Yeah, all right. Excellent. That's very good. When you said it was over, I thought you were like, you stopped, you paused, and there was a nice lengthy pause. I thought you were like, yeah, we ended when it was over. I was like, yes, that's accurate. But no, John is absolutely right. Remember, we've gone through our whole thing. We have the Egyptian captivity. We come through. The nation splits into two nations. These guys go, and they go into captivity, 722. Down here in the south, they go a little bit longer, but they're going down into Babylonian captivity. And this is ultimately where we are in this story. And as John said, this is not a pretty picture. By the time that we get to the third round of Nebuchadnezzar having to come out to Jerusalem and kind of whoop up on them a little bit. Remember the first time in 605, it was pretty benign. Nebuchadnezzar, he had other things on his mind. He was going after the Egyptians. He was going to go down into Egypt. And then he had other things on his mind because his daddy died back in Babylon, and he had to hurry up and get back and lay claim to his throne. Who did they take with them? 605, who did they take? You remember, Joshua? Okay, well, let's focus on who did they take in that time? Okay, very specifically, just give me names. All right, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Rakshak, and Abedi, right? So they go in the first wave, 605. Then they stop paying tribute, and eventually Nebuchadnezzar comes back over. And this time, who goes back? All right, Ezekiel goes back with him, and many of the tradesmen, right? And sorry if I'm motioning to a blank whiteboard. I drew the map last week, and it's still imprinted in my mind, but it was bad enough last week that I don't want to redo that catastrophe again. So just envision the best map possible up here of Mesopotamia, and that's what's up here. So from Babylon going back, he takes not only Ezekiel and the best tradesman, who else goes with him? Well, yeah, that is actually accurate, yeah. But this one's important to the end of Kings. Who is it? Do you remember Isaac? Yeah, which one? There's a lot of kings in this time frame. Well, Nebuchadnezzar is the one that's grabbing them, but who is it? I'm doing Rakshak and Biddy. Who was it? With a J? Yes, starts with a J. Anybody? Jehoiakim, yes. All right, so Jehoiakim or Jehoiachin goes back. Why not Jehoiakim, who is the one who actually stopped the tribute? Because he died right before Nebuchadnezzar arrived. His son takes in, and Nebuchadnezzar's like, I don't care, you're going. Somebody's going to go with me and face the punishment. And who did they put in his place? His brother. Well, Jehoiakim's brother, unless I'm mistaken, but I think it's Jehoiakim's brother, his uncle. But you might be right, Joshua. If I were to go back, I very well could be wrong on that. What was his name? Zedekiah. This time it's Zedekiah, puts him in place, and then eventually they talk Zedekiah into what? Zedekiah, they talk him into stopping tribute. So Nebuchadnezzar comes back again, and this time, what brutal thing do they do? Yep. All right, very good, Joshua. They put all the kings, they put them in front of the king. They kill all of the king's sons, and then they cut out his eyes. So that's the very last thing that Zedekiah sees before he is taken off. So, not only do you have Zedekiah being punished, who else? Well, I guess I should say, who does not go? All right, so Jeremiah does not go with them over into Babylon. So not Jeremiah. So in every place where God wants to have a person, he has a person. He has a prophet to the king in Daniel. He has a prophet to the people in Babylon in Ezekiel. And he has a prophet back in the land in Jeremiah. So God continues to put his prophets in the places where they need to be. And then as John said, we get to the end, and it appears as if we have been following the seed all the way from here, all the way throughout, and then you get to this last little bit of information, and the seed's done. We just watched or read the last king watch all of his sons die. The line has come to an end. The seed promise is over. It's finished. There is no hope. As John said, we're at the very end. This is the lowest of the low that could possibly be for Israel. Except, how does the king's end? You remember, Joshua? They didn't get to vote for kings. If there wasn't the next person in line, then somebody else would put him in place. Someone in power would choose the next one. Yeah, Isaac? One of them? Which one? Take a guess. Boom. This guy right here, right? This guy that was taken in the second wave, taken, put into prison in Babylon, what happens to him? All right, somewhere in here, he rises up. Evil-Merodach brings him out of prison, puts him at his table, treats him like fellow royalty. And I think the whole point of that just tiny little snippet that isn't like the next thing that happened, we're years into the captivity by this time. All that's trying to say is that you think the story's over, but the story is not over. The seed is still alive. The seed remains. And that brings us into a discussion about the hope of Israel. Because the kings, what is the kings based off of? The hope of the king's account. Where does, let me put it this way. Where does the king's account begin? Huh? No. Go earlier. Go earlier. Go earlier. Go earlier. Adam. The king's account begins with Adam. It begins in the Garden of Eden. The king's account is the story from here all the way to the failure of Israel right here. That's the word I gave last week, the Deuteronomistic history, which follows from Deuteronomy, the giving of the law, and putting your hope, your trust, your faith in the covenant and the law, and moving forward from there. As far as the law is concerned, remember, how did Deuteronomy end, by the way, at least really close to the ending? What did Moses tell the people? You're going to fail. Like, he did an entire song about how badly they're going to fail their covenant, right? And then they say, no, we're going to do great. Whatever the Lord says we'll do, we'll be obedient. He's like, no, I don't think so. And then Joshua, how does Joshua end? What does Joshua say towards the end? The same thing, and they say the same thing. That's exactly right, Joshua. Yeah, you come to the end. It's this mantra, you're going to fail. And they say, no, we're not going to fail. What happened? They failed. Exactly what they said, what Moses, Joshua, others have said, it happens. There is no hope left through the law, through the covenant. But is there hope still? Where is that hope found? I like that answer a lot, Everest. Everest said in Bethlehem, because it really is, because the hope is found not in the law of Moses, it's found in the line of David. And that's the handoff that Kings is giving as he's handing, the author of Kings is handing the baton to the next. Because this is where we end in Kings. Is this the end of the story? No, we still got a whole lot left, don't we? As far as the Old Testament's concerned. Yeah, and what I want to do is talk tonight about the book of Chronicles, or the books of Chronicles. You know, we have it separated into two books. And I want to talk about kind of some of the differences between the Kings and Chronicles. Before we do that, though, have you ever noticed the similarities between the Kings and Chronicles? I don't know. Kelly, can you reiterate to me what you were saying before? Because I thought you put that pretty well. Well, not necessarily that, but the way that you said that you had seen their similarities and. All right. All right, very good. So if you did everybody hear him? Like the mic was picking up and everything? Yeah, all right. So there is a lot of redundancy between these two accounts. And I think it's purposeful. You're supposed to see, as you are reading through the Chronicles accounts, you are supposed to see this is an overlay. It's being overlaid what the King's account has already stated. Does anybody know when the Chronicles account might have probably been written? Joshua, you want to take a stab? Okay. No. It's a good try, though. Yeah, Isaac. Oh, after captivity. Yep, definitely after. Anybody? The Chronicles account is probably, you could make an argument between it and Malachi as being the very last of the Old Testament books written. It is very, very late. It is written with the knowledge of everything that takes place, leading from everything that the King's accounts have recorded. And then after that, it also knows all about the return and all the events that take place after the return, and it leads us into, to some degree, this time period of silence. So they have the knowledge of all of this information. It seems as if the king's accounts, particularly if you assume that the king's accounts include, say, Moses and then Joshua and Judges and then the Samuels and all of that. If you do that, it's written by a whole bunch of different authors, right? I mean, we can understand that. Compiled together, put together by somebody much later, probably somebody down in this time period here who's taking what has been written and is putting it together, serving as kind of an editor of sorts, but still giving the information and the story as God would want that story to be given. So, all of these various writings down through here show up again as they're writing the Chronicles account, because the Chronicles account says, I want you to know I'm not writing a different history. It's the same history. It's the same people. It's the same events. It's the same things that took place. And there is an awful lot of redundancy. You could almost say that a lot of it is pretty superfluous if we have the kings. In fact, I'm guilty of this myself. If I'm going to teach historically through the time period, where have I gone? The kings. Have I gone to the Chronicles? No. It was kind of purposeful. Some of you guys tried to a few times, and remember I said, that's in the Chronicles. We're not there yet. We're not talking about that. It's because I wanted to make sure that we saw history from this perspective through the king's account. Because the king's account is all about God's people failing and going down. And the stories that you see are going to focus primarily, to a greater degree, on this kind of a story arc. Does that make sense? Compare that now to Chronicles. Let's start talking about Chronicles. Let's talk about the differences. Now, I know I said this a second ago. I'm going to say the same question, but I'm going to want a different answer. Okay? So I want the answer this time that you wanted to give, and I told you no, now it'll be right. Where did the kings begin? Well, okay. It was Samuel, Saul, and David. They're all part of the Samuel scroll, right? So Kings itself begins with Solomon. All right, so, and that's why I said, really, I would say Adam. But if you want to just be very particular about the scroll for the Kings, 1st and 2nd Kings, it's going to begin with Solomon, right? Its partner, Chronicles, look at Chronicles chapter 1, verse 1. Very first word. Where does Chronicles begin? Adam. Why does that happen? Because the Chronicles writer from the very beginning wants you to know, I'm covering the same bit of history. I'm not starting from any other random point in Israel's history. I'm not going to pick up the King's account, or I'm not going to pick up the Chronicles account with Solomon. I'm not going to pick it up with David, with Saul, or any of those people. In fact, you have 9 chapters of what? It's a bunch of genealogies. All right, it is some boring reading to go through Chronicles and to start through all of that, and it's just name after name. This person's genealogy, this person's genealogy, this person's genealogy. I have not spent enough time with it, by the way, to answer all of your questions that you have just been dying this entire time to ask. about the order of the genealogies, his organization, why does he do this person, and then go to the future, and then kind of go back in time and do all of that. And here's my answer. I don't know. My answer's as good as yours on that at the moment. Maybe someday I'll dig into that. By the way, if you haven't heard me say this enough, that was at one time one of my thesis ideas, was to try to unwind all of that, and I gave up on it for easier waters. So, the Chronicles account starts here, very purposefully. So it's saying, I'm not piggybacking on what's there before. I'm telling you the same history. And I'm starting in the same place with Adam. Now, the narratives themselves, ultimately, you have a little bit with Saul, but really, who's the main guy that the narratives start with? Did someone say it a second ago? David, yes. David is going to center, or he's going to be the central focus for really the base of what Chronicles is all about. Because the Chronicles are not about this kind of a story arc. The Chronicles are going to focus on a redemptive story arc. They're going to trend their stories and narratives in a different direction. And remember, where Kings left off, where is the redemptive hope for Israel? We just talked about it, the beginning of the thing. Where's the redemptive hope for Israel? Different king. That was Zedekiah. But yes, the redemptive hope for Israel is now in the king, who is the son of David. As Kings ends and Chronicles begins, now you're going to have a new central focus. It's no longer how they are going to fail before God in various ways. Now it's going to be how the king himself, and something that is going to be very, very closely tied to and attached to the king. What is that? For all of you people who are all into Chronicles and David himself is somewhat tied to this, although his son is more tied to it. When you think of Solomon, what do you think of? The temple, right? So, what you find, though, from the Chronicles account, it spends a whole lot of time making sure that we know, is this Solomon's temple? Whose temple is this that's built? Well, it is God's temple. That is absolutely right. But who is really responsible for building this temple? This is David's temple. We say it's Solomon's temple because Solomon built it. Solomon just happened to be the king alive when it was constructed. David, as you find through the Chronicles, is the one who does everything to make the building possible. All the supplies, the funds, the people, just everything, giving the wisdom to his son. Everything that he could possibly do, he does. Now let's talk about David here, and we're going to come back to the temple idea of him in the temple in a second. In the king's account, what would you say in the beginning of David's career? What's like the greatest thing that David does? Yeah, Joshua? When you think of David, especially as a younger guy, what comes to your mind? That's right. Good job, Joshua. If you didn't hear him, the story with Goliath, that he went out and he took down this giant, right? That is his greatest act. That's right. He took 5 stones, a sling, and a stick out with him, and he took down the giant. Interestingly enough, Chronicles author doesn't care about that. How does the Chronicles author begin talking about David in chapter 11? Chapter 11. Let's see here. Oh, I'm in the wrong Chronicles. No wonder that didn't look familiar. Start around, verse 4 or so. What's his first action? All right, taking Jerusalem. He's crowned as king, and that's the first thing that the Chronicles author is really bringing out. After the death of Saul and all of that, we move into this. Why is that so important? Why is Jerusalem so important? Okay, it's called this, yeah. Give me another reason, though. Yeah, Kevin? Yeah, because it's all about the temple. Immediately, this is the place, right here, this is the place that God wanted his name to dwell. And so when the Chronicles writer says, all right, here's David's first great thing that he does, it's not his defeat of an enemy, it's the fact that he defeated the enemy and got the place where the temple would be built. Does everybody kind of see that? The next thing that the Chronicles article really focuses on, after talking about his mighty men, which is something that is kind of just a tacked on thing in the Samuel accounts, but you get to chapter 13, what's this all about? Yeah, it's all about God. And what about God and his relationship with Israel? Yeah, now once we get back into the David narratives, the next David narrative is bringing the ark, as Lorraine just said, bringing the ark into Jerusalem. Why is that important? Okay, it's the Ark of the Covenant, which is tied to God's place in the temple. As David says, I think it's in chapter 28, he calls the Ark of the Covenant the footstool of God's throne. As if God is in the heavens and he puts his feet in Jerusalem. So it's an extension of the throne of God from the heavens down here into the very temple itself. So he brings the ark in. Now, if you go to the king's account, what is David's, what's his worst sin? Doesn't take long on that one, right? Yeah, Joshua? That's right. Very good, Joshua. Joshua said, taking one of the mighty men, one of his generals, one of his strong men, he took his wife. Took Uriah's wife, Bathsheba. We've gone through this. We talked about this. We understand that this is about as much of this story arc as you're going to find, right? Someone who's at the top and then goes down to the very pits. Would it surprise you to find out that the Chronicles author does not care about that narrative? It's not there. We think, oh man, some people almost think about Bathsheba before they think about Goliath. Some people think about this as just the worst possible thing that David's ever done before they think about the other. And for, the Chronicles author is like, okay, so that happened. Let's talk about what's really important. What is the biggest sin that takes place in the Chronicles accounts? David's biggest sin. Anybody know? Yeah, Isaac? That's right, very good. When he took the census, which is almost just kind of a tack-on story at the end in the Samuel accounts, at the end of David's life when they finish the narrative and they've got a few extra chapters where they mention this, that, and the other. And oh yeah, that's right. He also had this census that he performed when he shouldn't have, and it probably goes back to some laws that you find in the law of Moses and the way that it was done. And he knew he wasn't supposed to do it. Joab knew he wasn't supposed to do it. Tried to talk him out of it. He did it anyway. And then, God comes in and he says, I'll give you 3 choices. You choose how you want the punishment to come in. And he chose the one that would be over real quickly, a famine a pestilence, a plague. Man, I could not come up with that word. A plague that would come through the land. And then as it's devastating his people, he just becomes overwhelmed and he goes out before the angel of the Lord comes and strikes Jerusalem, which is going to be the biggest blow because it's the biggest city in Israel. He stops it right there on the verge of coming into Jerusalem, meets the angel of the Lord where? Anybody know? All right, the threshing floor owned by a guy named, Ornan or Ornan, or however you would pronounce it. Yeah. So he comes out on this threshing floor, and God gives him the opportunity. What does he do? Well, he doesn't get killed, but he actually is able to stop people from getting killed by doing what? What does he do with Ornan? Yeah, Kevin? Okay, before he built the altar there, though, what did he do? He bought the threshing floor, right? And then, as Kevin said, he built an he built an altar, and he offered a sacrifice there, and that appeased God and the angel of the Lord, and he stopped the plague. This is an interesting, just real interesting little tidbit. I have played around with various ideas on how to deal with this one. But look back in 2 Samuel chapter 24. In 2 Samuel chapter 24, verse 24. How much did David pay for this threshing floor? All right, 50 what? Yeah, all right. So, does it say 50 shekels? Is that what it says? Yeah, 50 shekels of silver. So, he pays this, probably a fair amount, hands it over, and then he performs the offering. Interestingly, though, go over to 1 Chronicles chapter 21. 1 Chronicles chapter 21. And remember, this is where Ornan's like, you're the king. I will give this to you. I will give everything to you. Just, here, you're the king. And David, he's like, no. If I don't pay for this, then a proper offering is not being done. I have to lose something here. So in 1 Chronicles chapter 21, verse 25, same story. What's it say there? So 50 shekels of silver, right? Is that what you guys have there? What does it say? All right, is it 600 shekels of gold? Is that what's there? Yeah. Is it not 50 shekels of silver there? Well, that's different. That's a whole lot more, isn't it? Why would that be the case? Well, in Samuel it says David bought the threshing floor and the oxen for that price. And so there's, this is not, I do not believe that this is one of the stories that has just a really easy harmonization. I don't think you're going to be able to explain this away by saying, well, I mean, if you're looking at it from this side, it's this. But, if you look at it over from this side, then 50 shekels of silver it's kind of like the same thing as 600 shekels of gold. All right. These are two totally different numbers. There is no way that we're able to make this conflate in some kind of a way. So, one of them just has to be wrong, right? No? All right, why do you say that, Kelly?
No. One of them's not wrong. There's a reason.
Okay.
The Bible's not wrong.
Okay. All right. I think there is a reason why this is going to be different. I don't think it's just a simple matter of harmonization per se. I do wonder, and I could not find the specific place. I was looking for it very, very briefly because I spent a lot of time on the computer situation this afternoon. But the amount of land that the temple is whoa, I haven't gotten there yet, have I? Strike that from the record. Let me ask this question, first of all. What is going to happen to this threshing floor that David purchases? Yeah, this is, in both accounts, you have this, you find it, even over in Samuel. This is where the temple is going to be built. Chapter 22, verse 1, here in the Chronicles. This is the house of the Lord God. This is the altar of burnt offering for Israel. So, this is the place of the temple. Now, why the difference? I just happen to wonder if perhaps the purchase price in Chronicles reflects not just the amount that the threshing floor would cost, but the amount that all of the Temple Mount would cost. And the story is not concerned at all about the specific information, what was delivered to Ornan. I think that was probably the 50 shekels of silver. I think the king's account is probably, or the Samuel account, is probably trying to give you an accurate representation of the events as they happen, whereas the Chronicles account is trying to give you a picture of a certain kind of reality. And it's a reality that is not focused in just the key events of the moment. If you want that, go to Kings. This is a reality that is focused on a bigger picture, because this is the bigger picture of the Temple Mount itself. And the Temple Mount itself, is that worth 50 shekels of silver? No, the temple is a whole lot more grand than just a little threshing floor where David built an altar. He's trying to expand your vision as you write this from just this incident that takes place on a threshing floor to the monumental occasion of the origin story of the Temple Mount. And that number is going to be so much bigger because the temple is so much more important than just this threshing floor. Does that make sense? Again, are the writers absolutely just simply concerned about writing historical, accurate information like they're journalists, modern day 2021 journalists that are going to a place and writing down events as they happen? Is that the focus? No, it never is. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to lie, but I think it does mean that there is allowance that's given for them to say, this is the picture that I want you to see. The facts of the case, the main basic common denominator facts are still the same, right? He went to this field, he purchased the field, and the temple was eventually built right here in this spot. All of that's the same. And so even if these numbers might be different, they're different, again, to bring you to the temple and the grand nature of the temple. Does that make sense? All right, quickly running out of time, and I got two more things to get through here. Richard said I had plenty of time, and I'm like, I don't even know if I'm have enough time, or if I'm going to have enough material to fill the time, and I don't know why I would ever doubt that would be the case. So, what are is it a goldfish that will grow to whatever size bowl that it has? Yeah. So, all right. Two more main differences. First of all, or the next one, who just very conspicuously does not receive any attention in the Chronicles? Yeah, Isaac? Okay. Well, he actually gets the same amount of detail. We're moving on from the David threshing floor story. We're moving into another major difference between the Kings and Chronicles accounts and the King's account. Who is really the King's account? And we'll say starting, right here with Solomon or whatever. Who is the King's account really about? What do they call it? What's the name of the book? Kings. Kings of what? Kings of Israel? Is that it? And Judah, right? Once you get to this spot right here, where you have Rehoboam and Jeroboam, and they split at that point, they're the kings of Israel and Judah. What about the Chronicles? It's just Judah. Yeah, when you get to the Chronicles, it's like, yeah, forget that. All of the stuff about the northern nation of Israel and their kings and all of that, it's absent. The Chronicles account doesn't care. I'm just going to throw, for the sake of time, I don't have definitive answers on a lot of these things. I'm working through these myself. I think maybe there are a couple reasons that this could be the case. Maybe first of all, in God's eyes, yeah, they may have split into two different nations, but in effect, they're all still what? They're all still one people together, and he treats them as such, and therefore doesn't treat them as two separate peoples in the Chronicles account. Maybe that's an idea. I think that there might be another reason. Anyone want to play the read Chris's mind game? I said for the sake of time, I'm just going to tell you, and then here I am going through all this again. Yeah. Yeah, very good. That's exactly right, John. What did the people say here in 1 Kings chapter 12? Remember when Rehoboam came back and he said, nope, you're going to find out that I'm worse than Solomon ever was. And all the people from Israel, what did they say? Yeah, Isaac? I want to know what they said. Because the words they used are pretty important. Nope. No. David. To your tents, O Israel, what part do we have with David? What they did is they walked away from the seed. They walked away from the line of David. They renounced the line of David at that point, which means they renounced their hope of a future restored relationship through David's line. Does that make sense? when they cut themselves off from David, they still may have in some weird kind of a way, but not really, because they still left the idols there and Dan and Bethel and all of that, but they still kind of almost somewhat followed the law and held on to the covenant and still followed Yahweh, but they did not follow the line of David itself. And the line of David at this point, where all of this is failure, and Israel was a marked failure in the north, they went even before the south did, right? And they went into nothingness. The line of David is the hope that's going to bring them out. And Israel has no part in it. After the restoration takes place, are they part of that restoration? No. So therefore, those who are writing all of this over here, they're not a part of the story. So they're not there. Does that make sense? As a plausible reason? I mean, obviously, there's nowhere you can go in the text and it says, by the way, I'm not going to be covering, if I were to do it, I'd have like a little footnote on the bottom and, I'd give probably a 2-3 page paragraph or something like that on why I'm not going to cover it. They don't do that for us. We have to kind of read between the lines. All right, I want to get to the very last one that I think is one of the craziest. I don't know, the absence of Bathsheba is pretty crazy as far as differences go. But go to 2 Chronicles chapter 33. I have already mentioned this, talked about this before, so it's not quite the surprise. And y'all have mentioned this and talked about this before. So I know that you are familiar with this story and how this story falls into play. But if I were to ask who is the worst of all the kings in the nation of Judah, who would you say? Manasseh. Doesn't take any time at all to come up with that name, does it? Did Manasseh have anything to do with this? Did Manasseh have anything to do with Israel's demise? Yeah, we really talked about that. When they hit rock bottom, and Josiah said, we're on our way, and Josiah made reforms and did all kinds of stuff, and God said, hey man, I really appreciate that, but I'm not going to relent because of whom? Because of all the evil that Manasseh had done. Manasseh is the reason that they get there. And the king's writers want you to know that. He is right here. He's the worst of the worst of the worst. And then you turn to Chronicles chapter 33. Verse 10, the Lord spoke to Manasseh and to his people, but they paid no attention. Therefore the Lord brought upon them the commanders of the army of the king of Assyria, who captured Manasseh with hooks, bound him with chains of bronze, brought him to where? Babylon. That's interesting, right? Not to where? Not to Nineveh, right? Takes him to Babylon. When he was in distress, he entreated the favor of the Lord his God, humbled himself greatly before the God of his fathers. He prayed to him, and God was moved by his entreaty, heard his plea, and brought him again to Jerusalem into his kingdom. Then Manasseh knew that the Lord was God. And then Manasseh goes through and does reforms of various kinds, even though the people still continued to do what they would do. How crazy is this story? First of all, who doesn't bother to mention this? The kings. You're not going to find this story in the Kings because that's all about the downfall. Why is this story in the Chronicles? Because if you want to connect anybody with the people in captivity, any king, who do you connect? You connect Manasseh, right? He is the one. And if Manasseh is taken in chains to where? Well, that's weird, isn't it? Why Babylon? Why not Nineveh? That would make more sense, wouldn't it? Because they are in Babylon, right? Now, could it be that he went to Babylon, Babylon controlled by the Assyrians, right? Absolutely. He could have been taken to Babylon. I honestly don't think it matters if he went to Nineveh or Babylon, Haran, anywhere else. That actual tidbit is not nearly as important as the picture that the chronicler is trying to get us to see, and that is that he, because of his sins, was taken to Babylon in chains, and because he was so awful, he was brought to the lowest point that you could possibly imagine, and then what did God do? Brought him to where? Brought him to where? To where? I want to hear more people. Brought him to where? Brought him to Jerusalem. He went when he did what? What did he do? He humbled himself. He repented before God. God heard his cry and brought him out of Babylon and restored him once again to the land in Jerusalem. If you want a message of hope for the people of God, it's this picture. Even Manasseh, as wicked as he is able to be restored back to his place once again. But what does it require? Humility and repentance. By the way, I think this compares very, very well to 2 Samuel chapter 7. Remember in 2 Samuel chapter 7, which is a story that's all about whom? Well, not Manasseh per se. Remember what was going on in 2 Samuel chapter 7? It's one of our 5 key passages. Which one is it? Okay, the promises that are given to David. About what? David said, I want to build a house for you. And God says, no, you're not the one. But God says, I will build a house for you, right? And he says, now as far as my temple is concerned, you're not the one who's going to build it. Who will? All right, his son who will come after you, right? And God says, I will have a father-son relationship. I will be a father to him. He will be a son to me. Who's that obviously talking about? Jesus, obviously, right? Except the very next phrase says, and when he sins, I will reprove him with the stripes of men. But when he repents, I'm trying to come up with the exact wording here, so let me just skip on over to that real quick because I don't want to mess it up. I will have be a father-son relationship. I wonder I couldn't find it. Let's see. Verse 13, he will build a house for my name. I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be to him a father. He will be a son to me. When he sins, I will discipline him with the rod of men, with the stripes of the son of men. But my steadfast love will not depart from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I put away from before you, and your house and your kingdom shall be made sure before me, and your throne shall be established forever. All right, so the wording itself of his repentance, but that idea that when he sins, he will reprove him with the stripes of men, with the stripes of the sons of men. But is that going to be the end of the story? No, even in God's reproof, there is still hope. And if you ever want to see the most clear picture of that, look at Manasseh, as the Chronicles author points out. So when you come to the end of Chronicles, and this will be the very first, last thing, there's not much to talk about, so we're basically done at this point. But you come to the end of Chronicles, and how does it end? 2 Chronicles 36, starting verse 22. What's it all about? It's coming back from Babylon to Jerusalem again. Just like with Jehoiakim ended the king's account saying there's still hope, the chroniclers end it by saying hope has now been fulfilled. And now the future-looking hope is going to be bound in what? Again? Continuing? The line of David of Bethlehem. That's right, Everest. And the temple. That is where the hope will continue to be moving forward. All right, questions or comments as we bring this to a conclusion? Yeah, Joshua. You're right. I did not. We talked about a lot of the history stuff at the men's retreat, but I didn't really talk about this, did we? So it's very astute. I'm impressed you remember what we talked about at the men's retreat there, Joshua. Good job, buddy. Kelly, does this answer some of the maybe lingering questions on the redundancy and such? So I'm letting you speak for just about everybody who may have had those same questions.